Good afternoon, everybody. I am Andrew Capetta, the Manager of Collection and Exhibition Programs at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Desktop Dialogue. We're going to start in a minute and wait for more guests to log in. So maybe in the meantime, use this moment to familiarize yourself with the Q&A interface, which is to the right of your screen. You can use this to make comments or ask questions during the program at any time. You can include your name or remain anonymous. That is up to you. We will select some of these questions to answer at the end of the program, and we're going to do our best to try to respond to as many as we can in the allotted time. We will also use the Q&A to post links to relevant artworks and resources and other additional information that you might find useful. Today's guest has provided some of those, so please look out for the Q&A for that as well. So over the past 2 weeks, if you've joined us in both Desktop Dialogues and Close Looking at a Distance, which is our new program with my colleague Kijo Lee, we have been looking at art objects that challenge the way we see and how we look at objects in museums. And this week's program, Care and Curatorial Practice, kind of follows from that principle and introduces new approaches to making art exhibitions that similarly reorient priorities, focusing attention to the well-being of audiences, artists, and other people involved in the exhibition-making process, as much as attention is paid to the objects on display. And we're really fortunate to have one of those innovative curatorial voices here in Cleveland, Latonya Autry, who's joining us for today's Desktop Dialogues. Welcome, Latonya.
Hey, hi. Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me on this program.
Great. It's wonderful to have you. For those of you that don't know, Latonya is the current Gund Curatorial Fellow at the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland, where she curated Temporary Spaces of Joy and Freedom, which opened earlier this year. We're going to talk about that exhibition primarily today, though others. And other exhibitions that represent her curatorial ethos of care include Let Us March On, Lee Friedlander, and the Prayer Pilgrimage for Freedom, which is at the Yale University Art Gallery in 2017, and the Art of Black Dissent, which is a sort of pop-up exhibition that's been at various sites and was started in 2016 and continues to today. We're going to have a conversation here for about 20-ish minutes, after which we will answer some questions from your audience. And at that conclusion, in about a half hour's time, we're going to post a link to a Zoom chat room where we can carry on the conversation in a more informal face-to-face manner. So I have lots of questions. We'll get to some of them, and we'll continue and love to hear more from you in Zoom as well. So stay tuned for that link at the end of the program, which will be posted in the Q&A. So Latonya, I thought it'd be great to start off by thinking about this, what you mean by, a curatorial approach that focuses on collective care, right? So the term curator, I was thinking about this, the origins of the term curator comes from curare, which means to watch over and attend. So curator means like a guardian or a superintendent. And built into that, to the name of the profession is, right, that it is about caring, but typically that care has been directed towards collections and objects, right? So when you say your curatorial approach focuses on collective care, what does that mean, and what does that look like in a curatorial framework?
Yeah, thank you for that really great question. And it is a different approach, I think, than many people think about curatorial practice. Yeah, so I'm trained as an art historian. I have a bachelor's degree in that, a master's, working on a PhD in it. And most of that training has been focused on, the idea of going into museums has been focused on caring for objects very much. And my program is very object-centered, actually, where I've been studying. And sometimes I find that some other, when you are in the museum sphere, there are people who will talk about caring for artists. But usually curators don't really think or seem to talk much about caring for communities as well. And for me, that's always been a really strong aspect of me going to graduate school and being in museum spaces. People like me, people from working class backgrounds, people who are Black, we often are not people who are shaping decisions in museums. And I've always known, and we're not the people who are like in these art history programs getting graduate degrees in art history as well. And so I've always been highly aware of that. And, knowing, my own background and feeling very proud of who I am and where I come from. So when I think about care, I'm always thinking about how can I care for people who come from backgrounds like me, the backgrounds that are typically excluded in the academy, backgrounds that are typically excluded in these museum spaces in terms of who has the ability to be shaping the direction of shows and programming and of the institution. And some of that came from, the great experience I got in graduate school of learning more about different Black feminist scholars, theorists, and really I have to say some of that wasn't really in my classes. It was that I was picking it up here and there in other places, right? It wasn't part of my training as an art historian. Unfortunately, it should be, but it's not typically. And I learned that, from different readings and conferences that I was going to. But I would say, I wasn't thinking about the training I got early on in my life actually was that kind of Black feminist training as well. But I didn't know that, and it wouldn't have, it wasn't framed that way. And I would say it really comes from people like my grandma. My grandmother really taught me to always think about, like, wanted us to, excel in school. And, if that was something that, I was interested in and did well. And she wanted me to succeed in school, but she always wanted me to remember my roots and remember people that I come from and that I do this work for and with them. I'm not ever, removed from because I work in these other spaces or something. And I later realized that when she was training me, she was already teaching me kind of a Black feminist lens early on. But, my grandma didn't talk like that. She was a woman that was born on a slave labor camp plantation in Mississippi. And, that wasn't, she had only maybe up to a 6th grade education or something. And that's probably not even really 6th grade because it was a plantation. So it was probably more like 2nd grade education, what she was getting. So she wasn't somebody who had that kind of formal language. And yet she's probably, I would say, definitely the smartest person I've ever met. And I think about her often, the lessons that she taught me. And I think now when I'm challenged with different things, when I am encountering, racism in institutions, in museums, in the academy, and other spaces, I think, what would my grandmother say? What did she teach me so that I could address these things right now? And so, yeah, my idea of care is really about caring for the communities in the places where the institution is, whoever's going to engage with that, caring for coworkers who are going to be part of this process of working with whatever it is. Of course, caring for artists, especially if I have the opportunity to work with living artists. And just even if they're not alive, I'm trying to think about what is their, what they were about, what their thinking is, thinking about the whole thing. And in reality, I would say, I just was saying this isn't part of the training for, and of course, caring for the objects. It's in there too. So I'm not going to say I'm ignoring that. I'm not. But it's part of being an art historian. But art historians typically, it's interesting because my focus in art history has been about understanding context and history. But interestingly enough, we don't think about that in terms of the curatorial work. Thinking about the context would include thinking about communities as well.
Yeah, you're thinking. Yeah, it's almost. Now we don't need to get into the specific terminology, but there's visitor-centered, audience-centered sort of practices that I think as a person that kind of has been and still is involved with museum education, is sort of informed by a lot of those just ideas of where you sort of thinking about audiences and everyone involved, and also thinking about different forms of knowledge. I really love the idea of you really understanding the ethics that you learned from your grandmother as sort of part of a larger constellation of things that maybe you see codified as forms of Black feminist theory, but you see those interesting connections, right? And I think that's a lot of what, to a degree, in a weird way, I think what educators do in a way, they kind of understand, they connect artworks through lived experiences and things like that, right? They honor that in everyone involved. So maybe could we turn to looking specifically at temporary spaces of joy and freedom and just think about how that this idea of collective care, how did that inform this exhibition? And we're just seeing some shots of it right now.
Yeah, so this show, it's really based, or not based, I always feel like I shouldn't say that. I'm hoping it's in dialogue with this discussion that Leanne Batas-Masaki-Simpson had with Dion Brand. And the discussion, I came across it.
I think we're posting a link of that, just so people want to read that discussion. They can read it later, obviously. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. So the show title, Temporary Spaces of Joy and Freedom, is actually an expression that Leanne says in this in while she's talking with Dion. And that ended up becoming like the title of the discussion. So it's online. I saw it online. It's I came across it by chance, like on Twitter. And I just go, okay. So I read this article and I realized that it's profound, the things that they're both talking about. Dion Brand is this brilliant Caribbean, Canadian scholar, poet, educator. And she interviewed Leanne Batas-Masaki-Simpson, who is this brilliant educator, activist, artist. She's Michi-Saget-Nishnabeg. She lives in the area now known as like Toronto, Canada. And they have this brilliant discussion, and they're talking about what it means for Indigenous and Black people. It's actually, Dion is interviewing Leanne about her book. So her book is As We Have Always Done. And her book, she talks about Indigenous and Black artists have been these people who have these visions of freedom, and that they're traditionally those people. And in that discussion, she's saying how, Black and Indigenous people should work together more in fighting white supremacy, in fighting colonialism. And in the discussion, she says that often it's those activists who are on the front line, Indigenous activists and Black activists who are on the front lines. And so they are hit the hardest in terms of, the physical assault, but also the economic assault, that ends up really crushing people's lives. And in there, she mentions this expression. She says, we need to build in scaffoldings of care. And like ways that we can protect those people who are on the front lines. So when I read that, so many brilliant things in this discussion, like I keep using the word brilliant because it's
well, it changed you, right? So yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's I get excited every time I talk about it too. There's so many points in it that I was like, boom, I can't believe I've never heard of this person. That's ridiculous. I had heard of Dion Brand, but I hadn't heard of Leanne. And then of course I got the book and read it. But this idea of care, that is exactly what like Black feminists are talking about. That's what collective care is about. It's about thinking about the people who experience violence the most, right? This isn't care for like racists, for instance. Actually people will sometimes appropriate. I've been seeing that lately, which has really been disturbing, and it's such additional violence. People appropriating care to be about like, let's protect racists. It's like, no, what this is about, this is rooted in like Indigenous thought. This is rooted in Black feminism and Black womanism. It's about caring for those people who experience violence the most. So poor people, Black people, Indigenous people. And these are like often interlocking, people experience gender violence. So, it's about if we create networks of care, scaffoldings of care to make sure that those people are protected, that's how we build a better society. So that's,
how does the exhibition do that? Like what, like in terms of the works, like what, and I was fortunate to experience the show, so I could understand, but I'd love to hear from you. Is there a work that sort of, stands in, right, for the larger whole of what you mean by this sort of scaffolding of care, especially for by POC, I'll use that term, folks?
Yeah. So when I came across that expression and that she said, the scaffoldings of care that Leanne said, I instantly thought of Tricia Hersey. A lot of people know Tricia's work. She has a persona that she calls the Nap Bishop. She's on Instagram as the Nap Ministry. She has I think probably about 200,000 followers. So a lot of people know her work. So this you see here at the, very far end of the gallery here, this space, it's a sleeping area. It's called a portal for rest. And there are 3 beds, and they have nice fabrics on them and everything. And pre-COVID, not now, but when the show opened January 31st, before, a lot of things really hit here in the States, this was a space that was, interactive. People were welcome to go in there and actually lie down. And what's hanging from the ceiling is cotton. And it's cotton, on those bowls of cotton. So it's got those little stems in it. and they are hanging on like a fishing line, hanging from the ceiling. And so it's this idea that Trisha is highlighting about how cotton, cotton is this crop that actually is what American capitalism is built on, right? And it's what built it's what built Wall Street.
Exactly.
And it's also an extremely brutal crop. The enslaved people who were forced to do that work, it destroyed, like literally would strip away people's muscles in their hands and everything to do that work. A really good book, I know I mentioned it the other day, but I always have to tell people books, is The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptist. Is extremely important to read if you haven't. And so anyway, Trisha is, making a really strong statement, where she is encouraging people to rest, to think about those people, those enslaved people who were forced to do that, were generations, that theft of people, theft of personhood, theft of, like generations of lives. And what she's telling people to do is refuse to participate in that anymore, refuse to participate in capitalism's grind culture, and to lie down and rest. But to also, when you do that rest, it's not just go to sleep. It's a rest that is trying to make us focus on why things are the way they are. It's a collective process. That's why there's more than one bed in there. She wants us to do that together, that refusal. And that is when we refuse, we create care for our society.
So it's kind of systemic in that one. I'm thinking too that literally the bed linens, right, as well, are sort of connected. Those very things that comfort you are also kind of symbolically connected to that. So that kind of is a really kind of a smart. It's such an interesting. I mean, I was fortunate to see it. It was at the opening, so lots of people were, or maybe I'm forgetting what was happening at the opening, but there was. I didn't rest, but maybe it's not for me to rest, right? I would like. Exactly. That's okay. That's probably why I didn't, right? I was like, this is for other people. I just wanted to move on to thinking maybe to kind of go back in time a little bit to an earlier exhibition of yours, and just to do some comparing to see, to look quickly at your exhibition, Let Us March On, Lee Friedlander and the Prayer Pilgrimage. I think we have an installation shot of that here, which is at the Yale University Art Gallery in 2017. And how did this sort of exhibition reflect some of those ideas of collective care in your mind? It's really different, right? We're looking at discrete objects, they're photographs. What was the experience of putting this together, and how was it a bit different? Could you talk more about this?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. When this is a show I really love. I mean, I always love. Well, I don't always actually love my shows. This one I love, and I love Temporary Spaces of Joy and Freedom a lot. This one, it is from a discrete set of photographs that Lee Friedlander, this very important, iconic photographer, made it back in 1957. And so, Temporary Spaces of Joy and Freedom is really hopefully an extension of a discussion that two people have. And so they do have a different kind of framework, but in many ways there's some similarities. Both in a way, activism is something that's always like shaped how I think about curatorial practice. And so I brought that really to both of these activities, both of these shows that I created. So really different. In this case, Lee Friedlander is not an activist. He was a young white man that in 57 that happened to go to this, march. He had met Bayard Rustin. He went to this very important march that happened in Washington, D.C. in 1957. This is Dr. King's first time where he's talking to a national audience. And and it's interesting because a lot of people don't know this history. And I have to say, I didn't. I was actually pretty embarrassed about that at first because I was like, how did I miss this? I study civil rights history and I didn't know this. And a lot of people don't, because there's really not that much scholarship actually about the prayer pilgrimage.
It's a shame. I learned about it the first time preparing for this. I will completely admit as well, for me. I think we're looking at some specific photographs that are from the installation. Sorry, Latonya.
Yeah. And so, this was, just an important show. And so in many ways, the things that are similar is I thought about it that this is important work to put out there in the world. And I did think about like the education and teaching people about the prayer pilgrimage and really thinking about that role of the photographer, that relationship of the artist to the subjects, to this history. That's some of the connection with temporary spaces and joy and freedom, the role of that, of the artist and whatever that they're shaping in their relationship to these issues and to actually community is really important. And in both shows, there is a lot of, like I shared scholarship in both shows. In the case with the Friedlander, I did a lot of research, actually, like historical research to uncover things and to learn more about this history and trying to pull those materials into the space. So there was a reading area in there. And for me, probably about every show I've done has had some kind of material section like that.
That's something I was noticing in talking with you, and also like kind of really looking closely at. I having seen temporary spaces and looking closely and talking to you about these shows, I noticed that there's this idea of like research being shared, which I wonder was like also part of the ethics of care. You're not sort of withholding that, you're sort of sharing it. We have that resource center here. And if we could go back to one of the images from temporary spaces where we see of the reading area, and I think maybe even there might have been a question about that too from the audience about what was on the baskets on the wall. I think this might be what this person was asking about. This is a selection of readings and also a place to sit where you could engage with that material. Could you talk about that briefly, or the presence of research and why that's important to you?
Yeah, so in this space here with this picture, these are 3 wooden bookshelves on the wall, and they have a bunch of books. I don't even remember how many books are on those shelves, maybe about 30 books or something, for, early learners and whatever, mid to later learners, whatever the expression is.
A range, that's good.
Yeah, there's a range of books here. And I'm very excited about the books, and some of it is because, Leanne and Dion are both writers, and so of course I included both of the readings from, literature from both of them, and other people, like in their discussion that Leanne has, she notes various artists and also a lot of writers who influenced her. So of course I went and tried to get those books and put them in the space, and it also, like you saw in the other exhibition, there were books in there, and it's about, really showing the world of, bringing these contexts together and making it be known that there's like a body of activism that's happening, right? There's people who have put these ideas together that have been fighting for freedom, and about sharing that, because often there are these breaks, there's these ruptures and things that are not passed on. So like the fact that so many people don't know about temporary spaces of joy and freedom, and how that damages us, right? Because we cannot use what these people did in 57, these thousands of African-American people who showed up. That was this huge moment. And if we were building and knowing about these things, we would be in a better place today for fighting for our human rights, right? For justice. And so to me, it is essential to, bring all of those kind of voices and perspectives in a space. And that's all to be contemplated, not to just stare at our objects as some kind of separate, removed art experience. It's all part of the world, and it's how we create change is through knowing about all of these pieces and teaching ourselves and teaching other people. It's it's all part of collective care.
I have a further question about that, actually related to your activism. But there's maybe we'll turn to a question from the audience or two. And those of you out there, feel free to ask questions through the Q&A. An anonymous participant asks, when you're developing a curatorial project, do you begin with an idea and find works that fit it, or with an artwork and develop ideas from there? How does care factor into how you select projects? It's a great question.
Yeah, it is a good question, and I've really done both. So, temporary spaces of joy and freedom, it was a discussion, and it was a bunch of ideas and things they were saying, and Leanne was mentioning various artists in there. I didn't end up selecting artists that she mentioned in there, but I did think, like, let me go look at her artwork. I didn't, know her work before. And so it was ideas that made me think of different works that I already was engaged with, like John Edmonds' piece. I knew about that from earlier. Trisha.
And that's the work on the wall, right? Of the sort of the portrait of the man from behind on silk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the person. It's non-binary person.
Sorry.
It's interesting because people make
judgments
and assumptions about people, right? And that's actually part of the work. Red Carpet is a piece that I had engaged before years ago. I thought about it because of that discussion. So in that case, this show starts with the idea, and then it was like, what works exist in the world, or which artists do I think are working along with this kind of thinking, this ethos that Leanne and Dion have. But in the case of the Friedlander one, it started with a set of objects. So it was like, here's a bunch of pictures of an event that I didn't know about, and now let me go learn about this event and figure out the context to flesh it out. So it really goes both ways. But care is, it's really that I'm trying to bring that to really every project. Any project that I would work on, I'm always trying to think about people who are most oppressed in society, and how does this project, if whatever it is, so with Temporary Spaces of Joy and Freedom, what's exciting about that is the show, when I was writing the essay for it and everything, I was thinking, I'm writing this essay and creating a show for Black and brown folks. I'm centering the show thinking of us first, not on the side, not marginalized. And that's actually an orientation I'm trying to do in every project I do, that I am thinking about the people who are typically pushed to the outside. I'm putting us at the center of the practice. And then what does that look like when I'm putting Black folks, when I'm putting Indigenous people, when I'm putting the people who are most on the outside, put us at the center, poor people. Then how does that shape what I do in the institution? And how does that shape, what decisions I make? That's always what I'm trying to do at the center.
And then also, I'm thinking now, then how does that change, right? I think this leads into our last question that I have and then how does that change how an institution works, right? So, we're living through a moment, long-standing critiques of museums have resurfaced again for lots of reasons, right? Systemic anti-Black racism, economic crisis, et cetera, right? A lot of these critiques focus on how museums mirror the racial oppression, economic inequalities of society at large. And you've been part of a lot of sustained activism with Museums Are Not Neutral, which we'll share, I think, more information about that. You have the Social Justice in Museums resource list, which is a great crowdsourced bibliography. We're going to share both of those with those of you that don't know about it. Some of you might, but those of you that don't, these are great resources. So how do you see this curatorial practice of care connected to this wave of critique? And do you see it as a way of making, in your own activism, do you see it as a way of making institutional change?
Yeah, this has been a rough time in so many ways, right? It's coming at us from multiple directions these days with COVID, and then these uprisings, racial uprisings that are happening because of the violence that Black people continue to experience regularly in this country. And we see, Indigenous and Black people and Latinx folks hit the hardest with COVID. So it's been a really rough time. And then it's been hard, I have to say. I mean, I'm proud in many ways to see more colleagues in museums, exposing the pain, the racism that's regularly going on in these institutions. But at the same time, it's so painful to know that all of this pain is out there that people have been going through for years, for real, right? So it's really difficult, and I totally get it. So yeah, I'm really proud that Museums Are Not Neutral is this thing that started with my friend Mike Morawski. We started it in 2017, and just really talking about the lies of this idea that museum is a neutral space, that is apolitical, and all this. It's obviously rhetoric that some people use to maintain a status quo that is of violence, that is oppressive. And so, Museums Are Not Neutral is one of those things that we did to really kind of push hard against that lie and get more people to be talking, right? To get people to be telling the truth about institutions, and realizing that these are political spaces. They are about power relations. And we all need to be telling the truth. That's just what it is. There's no way that a museum is not part of any kind of power. It is about power all of the time. And that's why there are, certain people are always in power in these institutions, and some people are always not, and getting silenced and everything. So that's one of the things, is trying to create the initiative has created a huge network that's actually now global. We had no idea it was going to go that far when we started it, but it has. It's a global network. And the good thing about it is it puts people in contact with one another, and they can start to build ways to help each other, right? To build, and that's the collective care aspect. The Social Justice and Museums Resource List is also another one of those ways of building together. I'm a person in many ways. I actually, as much as I do a lot of collaborations, a lot of times I would prefer to work just by myself because it seems easier.
Collaboration is hard. It takes work. We were just talking about this, it is, right? It does take a lot of work. I like the way that you just thought about that. These are resources that kind of are things that people have used and networks, right? This is a form of care, and this is how kind of maybe change can be made, right? I think, Latonya, we're at time, so I don't mean to, but everyone out there, this doesn't mean we can't continue this conversation. We're going to, continue this over in Zoom in a more sort of informal manner. So we're going to post a link shortly to the Zoom chat room. So I'll just ask you to join us there if you'd like to continue there. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Latonya. It's been great to have you, and we're going to continue talking. This program, everyone, just so you know, has been made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities, Exploring the Human Endeavor, which we're very happy about. Next Wednesday, I would like to invite all of you, this is August 26th at noon, to join Latonya and my colleague Kijo Lee for Close Looking at a Distance, a matter of perspective, during which they're going to look closely at some photographs. And I believe you're going to look closely at one of the Friedlander photographs that we were able to only look at very briefly today. If you'd like to continue the conversation with us in an informal manner, I think we're going to drop the Zoom link any moment now. So feel free to click on that link, and it'll open to this Zoom sort of breakout room. Latonya, I will see you over there. And those of you that just want to end here, if you'd like to explore works in our collection, visit CMA Collection online. We didn't look at any collection-oriented objects today, but there's actually lots of great things that are related, right? Lots of great photographs and other works actually by Lee Friedlander, so look those up. And if you're not joining us in the chat room, and if we didn't get to your question, you can always go to Artland's Ask on the CMA website, and someone will get back to you there. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you in a moment in Zoom.